Okay, this is English 250, week 6, part 4. Um, so let's talk for a second about religion. I guess I'll do his thing, and then we'll. No, I'm going to summarize it myself, and then we'll look at his words, because I think they'll make more sense once you understand what he's talking about ahead of time. So images, religious imagery, meaning paintings used in church, in temple. Um, this is interesting. So let's start with Judaism. No, let's not start with Judaism. Let's start with Catholics. Let's start with the Catholics. Um, my mother is a sort of born again Christian Protestant, and my wife is Catholic, and my ex-wife is Jewish. So I've had a lot of time to think about the differences between these sort of religious groups. Um, so let's talk about Catholics. If you've ever been in a Catholic church, there are images everywhere. Just for starters, there's probably a gigantic statue of Jesus on the wall, crucified, right? He's nailed up to the piece of wood, and he's up there, right? There's a big cross, and there's Jesus's body on the cross. And when you go into church, you're going to see Jesus. He's got wounds in his side. He's got those perfect abs, and he's nailed up on a piece of wood in church. Um, and if you go walk around a Catholic church, you're going to see piles of images. They got pictures of saints, different kinds of saints doing miracles and paintings. You're also going to see like pictures. There may be a statue of Mary, Jesus's mother. And they put a picture of God up, right? There's like famous Catholic imagery of like God. There'll be a picture of God creating the universe. So there's a famous image of God like reaching his hand out, and over here is Adam, and he's touching, and it's like God creating Adam, and he like it's a painting by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. I've been to the Sistine Chapel, and oh my God, it's just wall to wall religious paintings basically on every surface you can find. Plus, and everything's jewel encrusted twice over. So there's images everywhere. There's just piles of images of Jesus, of God, of Mary, of the saints. It's pictures. Cool. Okay, so people thought this was maybe a little decadent. Like the Catholic Church was sort of famously greedy. And if you go to the Basilica, or you in Italy, or you go to the Vatican or whatever, it's just jewel encrusted. I mean, it's trillions and trillions of dollars of art and jewels and shit. The Protestants, which was led by Martin Luther in the 1500s, the basic division of Christianity is it's Catholicism, and then Protestantism splits off, and then there's a bunch of different kinds of Protestantism, which involves Lutheran, Baptist, Presbyterian, Mormon. Those are all Protestant religions. So it's basically Catholics and Protestants, and then the Protestants subdivide into Episcopalian and Presbyterian and all that. Why did the split occur? Well, there's a bunch of reasons for it, but one of the things is that Martin Luther felt like there was something satanic about the Catholic Church, because he felt like people were worshiping the images rather than God, and that also people were worshiping priests. And he thought religion should be simpler. He said it shouldn't be about you worshiping pictures. It shouldn't be about you worshiping saints. It shouldn't be about you worshiping priests. It's supposed to be your personal relationship to God. There is no personal relationship to God in Catholicism. The relationship to God is handled through a priest. You don't confess your sins to God if you're Catholic. You go into a church and you confess your sins to a priest. And the priest is like he's in between you and God. But for Martin Luther and the Protestants, they were like, shouldn't you have a direct relationship with God? So that's what they did. And when you go to a Protestant church, like Baptist or Lutheran or Episcopalian, church looks different. My sister got married at a church like this. It's very different. There is a giant cross on the wall, but there's no body on it, right? There's not a lot of paintings. It tends to be pretty, there could be some, but it tends to be pretty empty. The walls in the Catholic Church are paintings of Jesus carrying the cross and being on the cross, and, taking care of the poor and the sick and whatever, flipping the tables over for the bankers and whatever. There's stories from the Bible, they turn into pictures. But for Protestants, they don't do that. They were like, let's keep it bare, let's keep it simple, let's keep it direct, because they were worried images. And notice, by the way, it's two things: that the image of God might cause people to worship the image instead of the person. The representation of God in a statue or a painting might make people worship the statue or the painting, but not just the representation of God, but the representatives of God, meaning like the priests. So they were worried about these things getting in between you and God, and they decided to eliminate them. And that's why Protestant churches tend not to have so many pictures or statues in them. Fine. Judaism. is just like Protestants, really. There's no images of God. They forbid. You go into a Jewish temple, they don't draw pictures of God anywhere. That's not. You don't have a picture of God anywhere. That's not a thing that Jewish people do. Muslims have a similar thing. You don't draw pictures of Muhammad. There's some famous stories about cartoonists in France who were drawing pictures of Muhammad to like make fun or be ridiculous or whatever. And people, terrorists went over and blew it up. They like literally killed people because it was so offensive to them, because you're not supposed to draw pictures of God. In the sort of in sort of the Muslim religion. Please notice that this is what Baudrillard is talking about. Is that what if people are supposed to be worshiping God, but the images that people make end up taking over, right? Just like a lot of you have only ever had fake honey and you've never had real honey, or maybe if you've only ever had orange Gatorade, but you never had orange juice. I was being silly with it, or if somebody clones you and then kills the original, and it's just your clone walking around. It's the same thing in church and temple, which is, what if people are supposed to be worshiping God, but there are these copies, representatives, pictures, representations of God, priests, but also paintings and statues. What if they're worshiping those instead of worshiping God? Then you lost the reality, right? It's supposed to be God is the reality, and the picture of God is a representation. But for some people, they like worship. They'll like touch the statue of Jesus for good luck, or people have a little Jesus statue in their car. They think it brings them luck. But the luck is supposed to come like from God, not from the statue. It's not supposed to be fucking magic. But some people treat it like it is. And that was what that was what the Protestants were worried about. And it's also, I think, what Jews and Muslims are worried about. So that example of people paying attention to the image instead of God, who would be, in this case for religious people, the reality, is exactly what Baudrillard's talking about. They have essentially confused the copy with the real thing. The picture of Jesus, or the statue of Jesus, comes to replace Jesus, or God's representatives in the form of priests replace God. So again, representation, representatives. Okay, so let's see. This is going to make much more sense now. So he talks about, I forbade any simulacrum, right, meaning no copies of God, in the temple, because the divinity that breathes life into nature cannot be represented. Indeed, it can. Like, you could draw a picture of God if you wanted to. But what becomes of the divinity when it reveals itself in icons, that's pictures, when it is multiplied in simulacra, that's copies like statues and paintings? Does it remain the supreme authority, simply incarnated in these images as a visible theology, or is it volatilized into simulacra which alone deploy their pomp and power of fascination? The visible machinery of icons being substituted for the pure and intelligible idea of God. See, I'm glad I explained this ahead of time. I hope you can see that this actually does make sense, right? That the visible machinery of icons has been substituted for the pure and intelligible idea of God. The images have replaced the thing. The art has replaced reality. A picture of God has replaced God. Okay, cool. He says, this is precisely what was feared by the iconoclasts, people who destroy images, whose millennial quarrel is still with us today. Their rage to destroy images rose precisely because they sense this omnipotence of simulacra, this facility they have with erasing God from the consciousness of people, an overwhelming destructive truth. Well, I'm going to get to that in a second because that's too much. We're going to talk about the overwhelming destructive truth in the next video. But he says some people, like, for example, he's thinking, I think, of things like people, like when cartoonists wanted to draw pictures of Muhammad and they tried to blow them up, and people were like, that's a major overreaction. It's just a cartoon. Why are you so upset? But Baudrillard understands why they're upset, because his point is that they're worried that images will cause people to forget Muhammad the prophet and instead pay attention to Muhammad the cartoon character. That essentially the image, what if the image replaces reality? Because for a lot of religious people, Muhammad and God and Jesus and whatever are the reality, and the images of them might end up replacing who they are. Because suddenly you're like, I'm going to touch this statue for luck. It's not the statue. It's not supposed to be magic. It's just supposed to be an image. But people love little things they can touch and feel. And I'll talk about the big destructive idea in the next video. All right, cool. We're doing good. I love it.